All right, welcome back for session 2 of Coding Live in Python. The first subject we're going to be going over today is going to be functions. So what are functions? Functions use case, reusable blocks of code that perform a specific set of instructions that you define or that are built into the language. Functions can be defined to accept 0 or more inputs, which are called parameters, and in most cases, output, which is return a value. To define a new function, use the def keyword, which stands for define, followed by the name of the function. When a return statement is encountered, the function exits immediately. Now I'm just going to go over the next slide and then we'll see it via code. So what are functions? Again, it gives us an example. It looks like there's a parameter. There's a function named name with 2 parameters, and it returns an answer and it just adds them together. All right, so in this case, name takes in the number 1 and 2. So it's going to add them, and the value that it will return will be the number 3. Yesterday's assignments already used functions, and you guys got a quick intro to functions. So let's try to take a look at what functions would look like. While we're at it, we might as well get a quick review over shell commands. So quickly, can anybody tell me how I can make a lessons directory, and inside of that lessons directory, create a file called lesson2.py?
You can make their lessons.
Okay, so now we have this lessons folder. It's great.
And then touch what was the name of the file? I'm sorry.
Day2.py.
Yeah, day2.py.
Okay. Sorry, seems like we have somebody trying to join us real quick. Let me accept them. Okay, perfect. So we have day2.py. All right, so I created that day2.py, but we see that I created it, but it's not inside of lessons, right? So.
Oh, good point. Sorry.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
We could move it, right? So you could do a MV day2.py to lessons day2.py.
Nice. So now we see that day 2 is gone. And if I open up the lessons folder, day2.py is in there. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So now moving on, now that I'm inside of day2.py, I can actually go ahead and create a function. So let's take that function that we took, for example. So I'm going to use the def keyword, which is going to create a function. When I press space, now I can establish the name. So now I can name this anything I want, but I cannot utilize. Oh, excuse me, Rick. I'm going to go ahead and mute you. All right. So I have my function, and I can name it anything I want as far as characters, but I can't. If I utilize number 1 and then start typing afterwards, it's going to throw an error. And same thing if I try to utilize special characters. We see that? So I threw that any type of special character, try to avoid it. Ensure that your variables start with an actual letter. Name constructor. That's what I'll call it. All right, and then I want it to take in 2 parameters. So in this case, I'll pass in first name and I'll pass in last name as my 2 parameters. So now I have this little red squiggly here, and it's telling me that it's expecting a semicolon. So by placing the semicolon here, I am now opening the body. Could you specify your question, Ken?
Hello, I'm trying to figure out how to locate the files. I can't see any files on my account.
On your what?
On my account.
Okay, so you're inside of your Replit account?
Yes.
Okay, so you should be able to go to profile, and then here have all of your Replit files that you've created before. Do you see that?
Oh, okay, I see it. Yes.
Perfect. After that, just click on one of them and then it will open it up.
Okay. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Of course, no problem. All right, so now I have this name constructor and I have this squiggly line, and it's telling me that it's expecting some indented block. Well, that's happening because that semicolon, or oh, thank you for correcting me, that colon is opening the body of my function. So when I press enter, you guys are going to notice that my cursor automatically indented, right? And this indented block was made to ensure that whatever I write here is only going to belong inside of this function. So I could say, all right, so maybe I could say first parameter is equal to fname, right? And then I could say last parameter is equal to last name. Okay, I see these little yellow squigglies, which are trying to tell me something's going on. So it's telling me that a local variable was assigned, but is never used. Okay, that's fine. Not a problem. I'm in line 4. And now I want to say that added parameters is equal to the first parameter plus the last parameter. And then I'm just going to simply return added parameters. All right, so this return statement is basically going to say that if I ever call this function, this is what the return statement of, or the return value would be of this function. So just like a parameter, right? When I print first name, that I would see whatever is on the right side of that equal sign. Well, now if I call the function, once the function is done running, I would see whatever's here on the return statement. So let's demonstrate that real quick. So I could say print. And when I say print, I can do, let's say Francisco. And let's do Pablo. And I'm going to put that as my first and second. Actually, let me restart this. So I'm going to call my function. And now I can pass my parameters. My first one being Francisco and my last one being Avila. Okay, so now to run this, can somebody tell me how I could run this file?
You type Python 3 space day2.py.
Perfect. So I could type in Python 3 day2.py, but when I run that, it's going to tell me that there's no file in this directory. So the current directory that I'm in is intro to coding live. And it seems like this file lives inside of the lessons directory.
Yeah, you'd have to either cd into the directory, cd lessons, or you can run Python 3 and give the full path lessons day2.py.
Perfect. So let's cd into lessons so that we could see that real quick. Run Python 3, and I can run day2. And when I run it, we see that my function is printing out exactly what I'm telling you. So I'm calling the function itself. And when the print statement is triggered, it's only printing the actual return statement of that function. All right. So now he's drawing on my screen. So now we can, sorry, I lost my train of thought real quick. Okay, perfect. So now we can also do the path where I can change directory 1 back. I see now that I have the lessons directory available in my path. Well, now I can say Python 3 lessons and then run day2. And the same output comes because all I'm doing is calling this. Okay, so there's a couple of rules that were established that I want to make sure that we can understand. So this first name parameter, if I go ahead and type in print first name, what do we think is going to happen?
Can you
Yes.
ask the question?
Go ahead.
Can you just repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, if I were to try to run this file right now, what would happen if I try to print the first thing that's established inside of the function?
It's not gonna run anything because you have an established first name. You have F underscore name.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, and then even if I change it to first parameter, right, so that it matches here, we see that it still gives me an undefined error, right? If I float over it, it still tells me, hey, this doesn't exist. And if I actually try to run my file, it's going to give me an error saying that first parameter is undefined, even though I established it here. So this is called the scope in Python. And basically the way it works, right? Just like we established here, where we're saying, yep, so here, a function can be defined or use case. So reusable block of code that performs a specific set of instructions that you defined. Or, I'm so sorry, we got somebody joining us. There you go. Or that are built into the language. Okay, and then it says we have a return statement and all that stuff. But what this is trying to tell me is that everything that's inside of this code block belonging to this function only exists within the function. So if I go here and I take this print statement and I move it inside of the function, now it doesn't throw an error. Because now when I float over first parameter, it knows that I'm referencing to the first parameter within the function. But again, if I were to take it outside of the function, it now throws an error because it says it doesn't exist. So now if I were to say first parameter here, and I make that equal to, I don't know, let's say Adam, right? And I run my file. When I print this first parameter on line 8, we see that what gets printed is Adam. Because again, the first parameter inside of my function doesn't interact with the first parameter outside of the function. It only interacts with what's inside. I'm establishing a new variable inside of my function. So they have nothing to do with each other when I come to calling them. The other thing that I wanted to cover is the return statements. So I have a return statement here at the very end of my function. If I place a return statement right after line 5, right, and I say I want to return, let's just say the number 5. Regardless of what's happening, I just want to return the number 5. When I run this file, we see that the number 5 happens. And let me see if I could print something after the number 5. Print hello. Well, now when I run my file, we see that I only see the number 5 because once this function gets triggered and it hits that return statement, all of the lines afterwards never get touched. A return statement will always kill the function as soon as it hits the return statement. And that's pretty much all we have on functions, and this should be enough for us to actually be able to work through our challenges. Does anybody have any questions on functions? Okay, perfect. Functions are good to go then. So the next thing we're going to go is going to be into control flow and conditional statements. So in control flow, we have, if you want to control how a computer goes through your program, use control flow. It evaluates to either true or false Boolean variables, allows us to select different outcomes depending on the user. So we already tried this, right? We've covered this yesterday over how this comparison variables work, but we haven't covered the if and else statements. So let's go into that real quick. So this name constructor, I specifically want this name constructor to work with 2 pairs of strings. But currently, if I call this name constructor and I pass in 2 numbers, when I run my function, it still runs, even though it's a number, and it's not actually creating a name. So maybe I want to put some control flows to take that into consideration. So here in that first line, I'm going to create an if statement. And in JavaScript, when you make an if statement, you usually have these parentheses. Well, in Python, you don't. You don't need any parentheses or curly brackets. You just make the if statement immediately followed by what it is that you want to check for. Well, I want to check if the type of first name is equal to a string. And not only do I want first name to be equal to the string, but I also want last name to be equal to the string. So if I want both conditions to be true, do I use an and or an or?
And
Perfect. So we'll place and here. And then again, we'll say type last name. And I also want this to be equal to a string. Okay, so only if that is true, it will conduct this behavior. Well, now it knows what to do if that's true, but now I got to give it an else statement so that it knows what to do in case this entire conditional statement isn't true. So now I'm just going to say else return this is not a number. Okay. So now I'm going to clear my shell and run it. And we see when it took the first two names, it checked that both of them were strings. And because it was string, it actually conducted the function that I needed it to do. I needed it to add two things together and make a full name. Well, when it identified that number 5 and number 8 were being passed, well, this was obviously false because they're not string types, they're integer types. So it immediately went into the else statement and it said, this is not a number. That's how control flow works. Does anyone have any questions on that? I know there was a specific problem yesterday that was asking about time in minutes and hours. That one will test out your control flow because you have to utilize control flow to determine whether you want to pluralize the hours or the minute statement. So that's a very good exercise, and we should have time to cover the exercises from last night today. So, from Monday night today. Perfect. Does anyone have any questions over control flow or conditional logic? Because we're about to get into the fancy stuff. So both print and return to the shell. Yes, so they're both inside of print statements, right? And they both have a return statement. So they will return something to the shell. The difference is that if they're both string types, it's going to conduct the entire lines of code where they're adding them together and then returning the added version of those two string types. Otherwise, it's just going to directly return that it is not a number. Does that make sense, Andrew?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Awesome. Moving on to iterations, and I want to make sure I'm not going too fast here. So let me check the time. Okay, we're going pretty good speed. All right, so iterations. We're going into loops here. So loops can be executed as a block of code a number of times. As long as the condition is true, the block of code will continue to execute. When the condition becomes false, the code after the end of the loop will be executed. So here we have that while loop. So while we have a run condition, we have the for loop, which is a for I loop. And we can do it in range, or we could do for I. Just in general, I'll have to demonstrate those so that we can get a more clear understanding of what these loops actually do. And actually, I think we're just going to go straight into actually seeing them in code. Otherwise, this could be a bit confusing. So let me comment this stuff out here. Okay. So simple. Let's say I want a timer, right? Or I want to do something like, I want to build a rocket ship takeoff because I'm working at NASA. Well, now I'll say, I'll establish a countdown variable. So let's say countdown is equal to 10. And I'll say while countdown is greater than 0, Then I want it to print countdown. Subtract 1 from countdown. And continuously do that. And then I want it to print takeoff. Okay, so this is going to come in. It's going to start the while loop. It's going to say, okay, well, is countdown greater than 0? Yes, it's going to print the number 10, then subtract 1. So now countdown is 9. Still true, it'll print 9, and so on, all the way until it's 0. Now, when countdown is 0, it's going to say 0 greater than 0. Well, that's false. None of this behavior will repeat, and instead it'll go straight down to line 21 and print takeoff. So let's see that happening here. We see 10, 9, 8 all the way down. Once it got to 0, it didn't take that into account because it was false, and it went straight to line 21 for takeoff. And that's how while loops work. Before I move on from while loops, does anybody have any questions on while loops? Okay, moving on. Let's move on into some for loops. Okay, let's say that I wanted the reverse of this, right? So let's say for number in range, and range is a function that I should try to specify here. And range is basically going to create a list of a function. So here, let me do it this way. So we see if I go ahead and try to run print range to the power of 10, it's going to give me range 0, 10. It's just telling me what the function is. But if I want to see what its value is actually outputting, I can cast it into a list. And when I cast it into a list, well, now when I run it, I can see what's happening in there. So range takes in 2 arguments. So let me print that range one more time. Range takes in 2 arguments. The first one being where it should start from, and the second one being where it should end. If I don't put a comma in there to explicitly say that I'm passing 2 arguments in, it's going to assume that I'm starting from index 0. And then I want to move all the way to index 10. So in this case, it starts at 0 and it moves up. And then you could see that it doesn't include 10. That means this function is exclusive. And by exclusive, what I'm trying to say is that whatever I pass in as the parameter, it will not be included in its output. Now, because I cast it into a list, I could do something like reverse. Or is it reversed? There you go. And when I run it, we'll see it. Let me move this one here. Right, so now when I run it, we see that I still have the same object. Reversed turns the outputs into this class, which is what we saw here. That's not what I wanted to see, so I needed to make sure that I casted it back into a list. It's a lot of data type casting. And then I'm turning it, this array from 0 to 9. Well, now it's reversed, and it's from 9 to 0. Right, but what I want is from 10 to 1, just like our while loop was doing. So I'm going to change this parameters. So with what we know about the way the range function works, how can I change the parameters inside here so that it can include, so that it can start at the number 1 and include the number 10?
You just add 1, make it 11.
Okay, so I make it 11. And when I run that, so now it's showing me the number 10, but it seems to end at 0, and I want it to end at 1. How could I add that in there?
inside, can you not just do comma 1, comma 11?
Yeah, so we have 1, comma 11. Just like here, we saw that we were starting at 0. Well, let's change the. Okay, well, now when I run it, the parameters that I passed were 1 and 11. So 11 is exclusive, meaning that it won't be included. So all we see is the number 10. And the number 1 is inclusive, meaning that's where it starts. So we see that it goes from 1 through 10. Okay, great. So now what I can do, since I know it's working properly, I can say for number in and say reversed range. Well, now I can say print num. And after that's over, I can say print takeoff. Comment that out. And now we see that it starts at the number 10. It iterated through each individual number in that list. Once it was done iterating through each number in the list, it moved on to line 19 and printed takeoff. So this is one way to do a for loop. Does anybody have any questions about this method of for loops? Okay. Perfect. So now I'll give you guys a small problem that we can solve with a for loop. So let's say that I give you guys an array of numbers, right? Sorry, a list of numbers. LSD numbers. And without using any of the Python built-in functions, I want you guys to create a function that will iterate through each individual index or each individual number inside of this list, add and give you the total sum of all the numbers inside of the list. How could we do that?
What was the question again, Mr. Francisco?
Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead. Basically what I want is without using any Python built-in functions, create a for loop that will return the sum of all numbers in the list.
So by the sum, do you want them added or multiplied?
Added.
Okay.
I'll leave it here for 3 minutes for us to think about it. And then right after those 3 minutes, I'll call on somebody and see what we can get. Awesome. Again. Okay, just as previously mentioned, let's go over ways so we can manipulate data with for loops. So I have this LST nums, and I have all this data in there. Well, now let's say I want to iterate there, and I want to grab each individual element, index element. So in this case, I know they're numbers. And therefore I can print num. And when I run this, we see that it's going to iterate and grab each individual one. Okay, well, what if I have a problem where if the number is 4, I want to give it a new value? Well, I can't do it here, right? So let's try it out. Let's say if num is equal to 4, then num is equal to, let's say 1. We want to change all the ones, all the 4s to be number 1s. And then afterwards, we want to print what the final LST looks like. or a list of numbers looks like. So let's clear this up. Let's run it. Well, you see nothing changed. The number 4 is still a number 4. So this method will allow me to iterate through each individual element and grab its value automatically, but it doesn't let me manipulate it, right? So now if I wanted to manipulate the list itself, well, then I would need to grab the index. So now for grabbing the index, what we're going to do is we're going to do something like someone else mentioned their answer, and it was in JS. They mentioned it towards a JS perspective, a JavaScript perspective, rather than a Python one, but they were on the right lines, right? We want to do range, but I also want to know what the length of this list is. And I know we haven't gone over list methods yet, so it's okay if we don't know this, but if I want to grab the length of a list, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it inside of this Python function called len. And len will actually return to me. Let me just comment this out and say pass here. So len will actually return to me the length of the list. When I run it, we see that it gives me 8. So this is great. So now when I use it in range, len list of numbers, well, we know that this is essentially equal to the number 8. So it's going for num, but now we're not grabbing numbers. Now I'm grabbing indexes. So I'm going to name it idx so that I know as a programmer that I'm iterating through indexes. Okay, so now I'm iterating through indexes. Let me print idx. What do we think we're going to see when I print idx?
Zero, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, perfect. So we're just going to see a rise of indexes, right? We're not going to see the actual values. Where does 8 come from? Oh, I was freaking out. I was like, where is that 8 coming from? Okay. And now we see it rise all the way to 7. It doesn't touch 8 because there's not 8 indexes in here. There's only 7. So that's great. But I want to grab that value, right? Because I want to replace all 4s for the number 1. So how do I get a value of an index inside of a list? Does anyone remember how to do that?
List underscore nums. And then a parenthesis or bracket. Yeah, that one. And then whichever one you're trying to find. So like if we were trying to find 4, we'd put 4 in there. Oh no, it's list.nums dot index. I'm sorry, dot index. And then I think it's parentheses, not brackets, right? Like get rid of the brackets and oh, is it IDX? Am I wrong?
Yeah, so we'll be utilizing IDX here. Because so we're going to go into the list of numbers, right? And then in the square brackets, we're going to tell it to print each individual index. So this is the equivalent of saying, I want you to print LST nums at index 0. And we know that at index 0, what value is there inside of this list?
It's 1.
Perfect, it's 1. But the difference is that now since we're inside of this for loop, it's going to continue changing the value inside of the square brackets and grabbing each individual element inside of our list. All right, so let's run this real quick. And actually, I'm going to put them side by side so that we could see their differences. So on the left side, we're going to see the index, and on the right side, we're going to see the value of that index. Okay, so we see the indexes going from 0 all the way to 7, and on the right side, we see the values. So we see 1 is at index 0, 3 is at index 1, and so on. Awesome. So now I want to change it. I want to change all numbers 4s into 1s. So this is where my conditional statement comes in. So I want to make a conditional statement that checks if the LST nums at a specific index is equal to 4. How could I write that if statement on line 23? Say again, Ty, I think you're breaking up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So if IDX double equals 4, that's
Mhm.
what we're looking for.
So we want to check if the value at an index is 4. Right now, what I'm
Okay,
telling,
I'm sorry. So yeah, so list nums, sorry. List
Oh.
nums index that IDX. My apologies.
yeah, perfect.
Double equals 4. Then do what? You said you want to turn it into a 1.
Right.
And then list nums index equals, because now we're assigning
Mhm.
1.
Perfect. And just like she said, now we're doing a variable reassignment. We're not doing a comparison, right? So by doing this equal sign, I'm gonna say at this specific index of this list, I want you to give it the value of 1. Okay, so now when I go to print my list, we should see it updated. So let's print the list before. And let's print the list after. Okay, so now we see 1, 3, and 4. This is the only 4 in our list. Well, on the second iteration after our for loop went through, we see 1, 3, and 1. Because it identified that we had a 4, this statement was then true. So then it executed the line of code on line 23. Does everyone understand this? And it's okay if you don't. If you guys don't ask questions, we can't make sure that we're addressing the questions. So please ask me anything. The LEN stands for length, and it's a function that will return the length of a specific object or list, or dictionary or list. Does that answer your question, Albert? Okay, perfect. All right. So now let's go.
I have a,
Oh, go ahead, man.
if you're looking for like to change the 4 to 1, how is that happening when you're targeting that index, like list nums index? I was just confused about that.
I see. So targeting list num index. Oh, I'm so sorry. I think my Siri is trying to take over my
I didn't
computer
get that. Could you try again?
every time. Sorry about that. So the way this is working is it's taking in the LST and checking the index, and it's printing out. Let's print out that value real quick. So right now when I run it, we're gonna see that it's taken in 1, 3, 4. It's printing out each individual value in the list, right? Well, I want to check if that value itself is equal to the number 4. So here, I'm just gonna go ahead and print that comparison as well. So that we can see it. Okay, so we see a run through. So it didn't print out the 0, but there should be a 0 on the left side of this. And then there's false, right? Because 0 is not equal to 4. So 1 to 1. And when I printed LST, it gives me none, which is falsy. I wonder why. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's because I put an extra print statement in there. That's why it's coming that way. Okay, so 0 was false, right? Or the index 0 came out to be false. The number 3, it's not equal to 4, so it comes out to be false. And then it gets to the number 4, and we see that the comparison comes out to be true, which is the comparison that's happening on line 23. So after that happens, it grabs the LST list and it gives it a new assignment at that index of 1. So now if I were to print LST nums IDX there, and let's say no longer a 4. So now we see 1, 3, we see the print statement of 4, right? This is true. So now it goes here, and when I print the new value of what that current index is, we see that it's 1, and it's no longer a 4. And then it continues with the rest of the loop, and it gives me back this list. Did that answer your question, Mary? Of
Yes, thank you.
course. Okay, moving on, we're going to go into another way of manipulate list with for loops. And this method will kind of do most of the work for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to say for, and we're going to specify 2 variables. One being the index, and the second being the value. So I'm just going to call it val. And then I'm going to say in enumerate, I'm going to call the function of LST nums. And then I'm just going to print in IDX and val. Okay, so when I print IDX, we see that IDX is just printing out all of the individual indexes. And when I print val, we see that it's just printing out each one of the values. Okay, so now someone who hasn't gone yet, how can I write a conditional statement that will check if the current value that I'm currently at in this iteration is equal to the number? Let's go with the number 2 this time. How do I do that? You want to give it a shot, Rick? All right, Guillermo. Okay. Which portion did I lose you at?
To be honest, I'm going to review I'm gonna see this lecture again to pick more traction on it.
Okay, perfect. Please, if at any point you have a question, let me know so I can address it, because I'm sure, if one person has a question, other people in the class are going to have it. Let's see. Alex?
Yeah, I'm with Guillermo. I need a little more time.
Okay. Yeah, of course. No, I get it. Yeah, I know this whole subject is new to us, so I fully understand. Yeah, so if I wanted to do a conditional, well, I would start with the if statement, right? And when I printed IDX and val, I can see the val is what's printing the actual value of the numbers inside of my list. So I can say if val is equal, right? So I'm gonna do the double equal sign. And then I'm gonna say if it's equal to the number 2. Well, if it's equal to the number 2, can anyone tell me how I can do the variable reassignment now on the list so that the number 2 is no longer there, but instead a number 1? Yeah, I definitely agree, Steven. Right, so we could try val 1, right? And now when I run this, oh, forgot to print this. So print LST nums. Okay, but we see that the number 2 still remained, right? And when I did the for in loop, we ended up running into the same problem, and we figured out that we needed, in order to do variable reassignment with list, we needed to reference the index to do the reassignment. So with that said, all of this is correct, but I just need to change right here on the left side. How could I reference the index that I'm currently located instead of the value?
I would say if list underscore nums index equals 1.
Perfect. Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
exactly what we want, right? We want to grab the list nums, grab the current index that we're currently located at, and we want to give it the new value of 1. And now when I run this, we can see that we have 1, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now we switch that 2 to where that 2 is now equal to a 1. Perfect. And that is the last way that I know of that we can iterate through a list using the for loop. But yes, it definitely is a lot of information, and we did cover it in a pretty good speed. So please, if anybody has any questions over the 3 ways that we can iterate through a list, feel free to ask right now.
Could you possibly use the dot replace function here?
The dot replace function for the list, we likely can.
With the old variable first, comma, u.
Yeah, so let's see, it would be lst num dot replace. And then we want the old variable. So in this case, it would be 2, and the new variable would be 1. And then let's say I want to print list nums. Hopefully I don't get a syntax error. I did get a Okay, so it's telling me that a list object has no attribute replace. Okay, so list, the replace function is explicitly for string types. And list nums is a list. To be able to apply this, I would have to turn it into a string, use the replace, and then turn it back into a list.
Okay.
I haven't gone over data casting yet. I can cover it real quick, but I'm afraid that it might confuse some people, so I would rather avoid.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, perfect. And let's continue pushing through our slideshow here. So we did our while loops, we did our in loops. We went over how to iterate through a list, but we haven't covered how to iterate through a dictionary. So let's do that real quick. So now let's say employee information. And this employee information is equal to a dictionary. Okay, what do we need for an employee? We need to know his name, right? So let's start with name. What else do we need to know about the employee? Let's see.
Hometown, maybe?
There you go. So hometown, let's go with unknown. What else do we need here? An employee would like to know his hometown. Let's see, I want to know if he's maybe a good employee, right? Let's say good employee. And let's make that true.
They hired.
They hired, and I can't remember that off the top of my head. So let's just go with a general date.
Like a year is fine, I guess. A year hired, yeah.
Oh, there you go. So time hired, yeah. Time hired. And let's just make that, let's make that 1, and we know that it stands for years. Okay, so now we have this simple dictionary that has 4 keys and 4 values. Well, let's see what it looks like if I want to iterate through this dictionary. So just like a list, right? I could start with the for in loop. So let's say I say for key in employee information. And I just want to print key. what do we think we're gonna see on our shell when I run this Python file?
You're gonna see name, hometown, good employee, time hired.
Perfect. Yeah, because that's gonna go ahead and grab each individual key, right? Now, if I wanted to see the value, how could I do that? How could I change it so that instead of seeing the key value, instead of seeing the key of the key value pair, I can see the value?
You can do for employee information in this dictionary, but it's shortened DICT dot values. And then at the bottom, put print.
Values. And then for val. Like that.
Yes, Mr. Francis, sir.
All right, let's see what that looks like. Okay, so now we see that we can grab the values in this way, right? So now we're grabbing values. We could also, if we need access to both the key and the value, we can leave it at key and then call the employee information at key. And let me take that off. And that works as well. But now I can also do key and run it. And now we see the key and the value. So both of those ways are excellent. This works really well. I wonder if we could use enumerate here. I'm not really sure, to be honest. So let's try it out. Let's see what it does. Key, comma, value. Oh. Okay, so now if I do key comma value and I try to use enumerate, we see that it tries giving me indexes, right? And val, instead of giving me the actual value, it just gives me the key. So enumerate is definitely not the best way to iterate through a dictionary. Instead, we can do for key in the actual employee information and grab all the individual keys. If we wanted the value, why are you mad? Oh, that's where you're mad. There you go. If we want just values, then we could do what Eclipse. We could do what Eclipse suggested. And just grab nothing but the values as a form of a list. So let's see what that looks like actually. Let's print it. Let's print employee information dot values so that we can see it. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Okay, so we see that it's actually giving me a list. So it tells me all the dict values. So it's an object data type. And it's telling me that it's a list. And in this list, I then have my name, all the values in there. I can also try to grab the keys. And when I run this, we see that it gives me nothing but the keys as well. And I think there's a key value pair function.
I think you can do dot item. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, no, yeah, I just saw, let's see what that looks like. Okay, so item seems to give me back a list of tuples, which we can use to iterate as well. I wonder if I can deconstruct that. Oh, interesting. Let me try it out.
If you do,
Go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say what you're doing. Like if you do key values in employee info dot items.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. I'm losing it. Sorry. Let's see. Stay tuned. Oh, I left it. Yeah, but it seems to work the way we wanted it to. Where it's working kind of as enumerate and it's giving me back the key and the value. So now I could do some variable reassignment. So let's say I wanted to change, I wanted to ensure that good employee is false. I mean, that good employee is false for Francisco. So as I'm iterating, let's say I check if key is equal to good employee. And I think in this case, we'll use this one. Then we can say employee information key is equal to false. And let's print our dictionary afterwards. Okay, and now we see here for employee information, Francisco is now not a good employee because it's false. Perfect. All right, so those are some ways that we can iterate through dictionary. Dictionaries are a lot simpler than they are as far as list, but the main thing still stands. If you need to do some type of variable reassignment to either a list or a dictionary, you need to reference the index or the key of that value that you're trying to change. Does anyone have any questions about iterations and loops?
Mr. Francisco, I changed my name. I don't know why it defaults to my Google account, but
Thank you.
let's say you have multiple employees in the dictionary and you only wanted to change one. How would you access just that one specific employee? Would you have to assign it to like employee information 1 and then do like employee information 2?
Yeah, so what you're talking about is if we have multiple, then I'm looking at a list, right? So now in this list, I can say again, and actually, let me just copy this. Oh, that's there we go. Say Adam. And yeah, actually, let's demonstrate that that doesn't matter real quick so that everyone's tracking. Okay. And now we have, let's say, Ben. Okay. So now let's say that I typically, right? So what this would look like, and this is actually a fantastic example over a real world application. So let me go to the Pokey API again. So here in the Pokey API, we have this abilities, right? I forgot what it is. Pokemon. That's not it. Okay, so if I just send it to Pokemon, we see that it returns to me a list, right? And this list has dictionaries inside of them. But these dictionaries also have their name and their URLs. Well, if I wanted to grab a specific Pokemon, I would have to check for that specific name. Or if I'm lucky, IDs would come back with them. So typically what we could see here is something like ID and then 1. Two, and 3. Right. And now to go over what you were saying, well, what I can do is I can iterate through that entire employee information. So for employee in employee information, and then I can check if the name is Francisco, right? Let's say I wanted to specifically grab Francisco. So let's say if employee name, and actually we can see that there's a difference here. So we have Adam, Ben, and Francisco, but Francisco also includes his last name. So I'm just gonna do a different type of comparison, and I'm gonna say if Francisco is in the employee name. So if anybody has the employee name of Francisco, well, now I'm gonna go ahead and change their status of whether they're a good employee or not. So employee, good employee is equal to false. And now let's say that I print out all of my employee information. We can see that Francisco is now false under good employee. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Mr. Francisco, that answers it.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, great. We've been going for a while. We should probably take a break. Let's take a 10-minute break real quick, or actually that was a lot of information. Let's make it a 15-minute break real quick, and let's come back at 8:10 to continue on with our lecture. Looks like we have a couple of other things to go over, but when we come back, I think we're going to break up into breakout rooms and start working on the assignments, or we could do a review. We'll discuss when we come back. Very well. I shall see everybody in 15 minutes. Thank you so much, everyone. Click. All right, so here's the total change problem. It looks like we need to take in two parameters, and then we want to return the exact change. So the first part of this problem is ensuring that there's two parameters being passed, the amount paid and the total cost. So how do I ensure that this function is taking in two parameters? Can anybody tell me the answer to that?
Yeah, I got it. So you'd put in amount paid, comma, total cost. Those are your two arguments.
Perfect. All right, so now I got my amount paid and total cost. So now the next thing is, I want to make sure that I'm returning the exact change. So let's worry about whole numbers for now, or whole integers for now. How do I do that?
Return
set up-
amount.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Andrew. Sorry.
You'd set up an equation, total change.
Okay, so let's call it, I'm just gonna call it change, okay?
Equals, and then round, parentheses, amount paid minus total cost, comma 2. And that just tells you that you're going to round to 2 decimal places at most.
Yeah, so that's great. I wonder if this works here. Oh, that doesn't work here. Okay. Yeah, that's perfect. So this is this round function. If I hover over it, it should be able to give me. Oh, let me return change real quick.
Yep.
I want to see if it can give me a summary. Okay, so there's round. So round is going to take in a number, and it's going to either turn it into a float or an integer. So if it has the float capabilities, it will return to me the float number. Otherwise, it will return the integer. So this is great. All right, it's going to take in the amount paid, which is $100 or 100, and it's going to subtract the total cost, which is 75. Now it's going to round it to 25.00, but here it told us if it has float capabilities, I'll return a float, but otherwise I'm going to return an integer. So I know that 0.00 is unnecessary, so we'll actually return the integer of 25. And just so that we can visualize that, I'm going to also print it. So that we could see it. and then I could run it, but I don't want to develop bad habits. So instead, I'm going to go ahead and type in Python 3, and I'm going to run main.py. Okay, so we see 25, which is what change would look like, and it returns it. So now let's try the second problem. And we see 2.72. Now it doesn't go past the 2 because we explicitly told it that it would only go up to the second number. Perfect. This is a great answer. All right. Does anyone have any questions over total change due?
And instead of doing the change equal, can you just put return and then go right into the round amount? Wouldn't that come the same answer?
Let's check. Right, let's clear it. Yeah, so it does give us the same exact answer, right? The only difference is that not necessarily, we're not sacrificing anything by making those extra lines of code. So if you feel comfortable making those extra lines so that you could put print statements and see what's going on in your program, then fantastic, do so. If you feel comfortable if you feel already that comfortable with Python to where you're like, I know exactly what this line of code is doing, I'm not going to need to print it individually, just go ahead and return the entire line of code, or just make it a one-line statement without having to make it into a variable, since you're not going to reference to it later on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Is there a preferred method, I guess, for as a beginner? Would it be better to do it the previous way? Just
as a beginner, I would always recommend, as you take a step forward towards the answer, save it to a variable and print it so that you know that the behavior you're trying to cause is actually happening correctly. Because the worst thing is when you work on a complex algorithm or a more than usual complex algorithm, and you have like these 25 lines of code that you built out, and then you run it and you get this error and you have no idea where the error came from. Or the part that's even worse is you don't get an error, but you're not getting the answer that you wanted to get. Because that's when you really have to go into each individual line, deconstruct it, whereas if you're already working by deconstructing it and printing out each individual step, you're ensuring that the behavior that you want is happening throughout the entire time. Does that answer your question?
it does. Thank you.
Of course. If we don't round and limit the decimal, why does it return 2.71999? Okay, so that's a good question, Rick. So inside of the actual computer, integers aren't necessarily whole numbers, if that makes sense. So the number 1 isn't really a number 1. So when you subtract there, I believe the correct thing is 1.00001. That's what the computer interprets it as. So when you subtract it, that's why you lose that decimal point and it goes down in value. So we always have to, once you start subtracting float numbers from each other, you have to ensure that you use some type of round or an integer variable to be able to ensure that it stays flat. Does that answer your question, Rick? Okay, perfect. Moving on forward. All right, so now we got the convert to hours. So a variety of function takes in a number of minutes and returns the hours equivalent as a float integer. Okay, so here we have the convert to hours, we have 45. So this seems pretty simple. Well, the first thing is it's gonna need to take in a parameter, which is the number of minutes. So how do I tell it how many parameters to take into this function?
You would I would say 2 hours equals round. Well, okay, yeah. So 2 minutes is the argument.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, sorry.
Let's call it minutes.
Or minutes. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so now we have the minutes, and I want to make sure that minutes is being divided by the total amount of minutes that are inside of an hour. All right, so how could I do that?
Yeah, so I would do 2 hours.
Okay, I'm gonna name it hours because that's the name of
Okay.
our function.
Sure.
Uh-huh.
So hours equals round, parentheses, and then minutes divided by 60/60, and then comma 3, because we have one with 3 decimals.
Perfect. Okay, so let's print our hours, and then after that, let's go ahead and return hours. Okay, so Python, oh, that's not it. Okay, so we see 0.75, 0.25, and 2.3. And then let's see what it would look like if we didn't pass the round. Okay, we got this funny looking thing right here. Once it gets down to the 2.083, it never stops. Okay, well now I wonder what happens if we just pass round without a second argument. Okay, well, if I just pass round without a second argument, it seems to have failed altogether. It just gives me 1, 1, and 2. So we need to ensure that we include that 3. I hope that helps visualize what the round function is doing. Perfect. Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much. Was this Andrew?
Yes, this is Andrew.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, man.
Yep.
Awesome. Does anyone have any questions over this problem? All right, pretty straightforward. Let's move on to the next one. So instructions, write a function that calculates the dollar amount returned on your initial investment, given an initial investment and an annual return percentage. Okay, so it looks like this is a simple multiplication algorithm, right? It looks like we're timing whatever our initial thing is times the decimal point. So the first things is it takes in 2 arguments. So if I read this, the dollar amount return on your initial investment, given initial investment and annual return. So how do I put initial investment and argue an annual return into this function as parameters?
I just typed in investment, comma rate there after the mortgage payment.
Investment rate. Okay.
And then I did return investment times rate.
Awesome. So let's go into the shell. Let's run it real quick. Oh, I forgot to put the N in Python. All right, perfect. Now we see true and true. Great. Does everyone understand how this works? Does anyone have any questions? That was awesome, Alex. Thanks so much. All right, so now we got convert to hours. So write a function that takes in a number of minutes and returns a string of hours and minutes. Okay, so now we see this input takes in a number of minutes. So I need to know the remainder, and I need to know how many times 60 goes in there. Okay, so let's try to check this out. So how do I take in the minutes itself? What do I need to put here inside of these parentheses?
Minutes.
Nice. So we'll specify minutes. Great. So now here's the part where we want to figure out what this is asking. So now I'm going to go ahead and do some pseudocoding where basically I'm just going to comment out this function so that I understand what's going on. Okay, so the first thing that it's asking me is it's asking me to determine how many hours and how many minutes would be left over. Okay, so I'm going to say hours will be equal to minutes divided by 60. And then minutes will be the remainder of minutes divided by 60. Now, my initial reaction would be that I could just return this an interpolated string, but we can see here that I have to also do if it's pluralized or not. So now I'm going to initialize an answer variable. Will be empty for now. And now I'm going to do my conditional rendering. So I'm going to say if hours is greater than 1, I want to pluralize hours and add to answer. And the same thing for minutes. But before I do minutes, I also want to add and. So now add and. Onto answer. And now if minutes is greater than 1, I want to pluralize minutes and add to answer. Okay. So let's establish this. We got our hours. And as we mentioned, that would be equal to the number of minutes divided by 60. And I also want to make sure that I round that just so that I don't get any funky numbers. Okay, the next one is going to be, so my minutes will be remainder of minutes. Okay, so now I'm just going to say mins because I already used the minutes variable. And I'm going to say mins is equal to, again, I'm going to round. Actually, I don't think I have to round on this one. Yeah, so in this one, I'm just going to go ahead and say minutes, the remainder, which will be modulo 60. Okay, now I have my answer, which will be an empty string. Now I have some conditional rendering where I'm saying if hours is greater than 1, is greater than 1 or 0, because I just see here that 0 is hours. So I also want to say here, or 0 or equal to 0. So I'm going to say or hours is equal to 0. Well, then I want answer to plus equals. And then I'm going to create an F string here where I'm going to place hours. Otherwise, answer will have F hours hour. Okay. So that runs that conditional statement, and now I can get into minutes. So now I can say if mins is greater than 1, or actually I should just follow my pseudocode because that's the entire reason why I wrote it. Okay, it seems like now I want to add that and, so now I can say answer plus equals and with some spaces in there. And then finally, I have my last conditional where I'm asking if minutes is greater than 1, then I want answer plus equals, make it into an F string where I would include mins and then say minutes, else answer plus equals F mins. And this one will be minute. Okay, and then finally, I want to return answer. So I'm gonna go ahead and print answer so that I can view it as well. And then I'll return answer. So I do expect to see some errors here, so I'm gonna comment out everything. And the only reason why I expect to see some errors is because that was a considerable amount of code and conditional statements that I just wrote. So ls, okay, so Python main py. Okay, so it seems like it worked, right? We got 2 hours and 5 minutes. But I'll comment the next one. Okay, everything worked there as well. Let's see if my zero condition worked. Okay, so my zero condition didn't work. And the reason why it didn't work is because we can see here that it rounded up to 1. So maybe round isn't what we want. Maybe what we want is floor. Math.floor in Python. So let's see what the function, we need to import math and grab floor. Okay, so let's do that. So import floor, or sorry, math. And instead of round, I want math.floor. Okay, let me clear this. Okay, so math.floor fixed it. My round was rounding me up to the number 1. I didn't want that. I wanted me to round down. So when I rounded down, it gave me 0 hours and 55 minutes. So now my zero conditional is working. And finally, I can check my 1 minute, and my 1 minute is also working. And no, we have not gone into this. We have not gone that in depth yet. We haven't touched the methods yet. That's going to be part of tomorrow's lesson. Why not use greater than or equal to 1 since you have a 1 hour and a 1 minute? Could you specify, Michael?
Yes, since one of the answers is 1 hour and 15 minutes, and then you have 2 hours and 1 minute, why wouldn't you use greater than or equal to 1? Because you're saying greater than 1, meaning it has to be above 1 to come back true, correct?
You're talking about here?
Yes.
Yes, I could just say if hours is equal to 1. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, if it's like right here, why wouldn't you just say it's greater than or equal to 1? Like you would just put the equal and greater than sign to the 1. And would you still have to add the or hours equals 0?
So here, if I wanted to take out the or statement, what I can check is if hours is not equal to 1.
Okay.
Yeah, if hours is not equal to 1. And that should still work. Yeah. So if hours is not equal to 1, then it should do this behavior. Because I can't check if it's less, because if it's less, we also know that 0 hours is supposed to be pluralized. So we can check if it's not equal to 1. That's a good catch.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just wondering because I was like, couldn't you just do greater than or equal to 1 and it would come back and you wouldn't have to put the equal to 0?
Well, if I do greater than or equal to 1, I believe that would break it, but let me try it. Yeah,
Okay. Oh, yeah, because they're gonna be they always put those fractions at the end because it's like 1.111.
yeah,
Okay, I see.
awesome. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, and I know someone specifically requested this problem. I hope this helped clear that up. And if it didn't, and you don't want to ask me here, please ask me through Slack. All right.
I'm sorry, Francisco.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, could you go over again? Why did you have to import math into this problem?
Yeah, so when I was using round, and let me actually just comment these two out so that we can see it. So I expected this number 0 to come from hours, right? And when I used round, which is what I was using originally, it was giving me 1 hour and 55 minutes. And what I expect is 0 hours and 55 minutes. So let me actually print that out. So if I take in the minutes and I divide it by 60, it was giving me 0.91, which when I rounded, it obviously would go up. So that's why I would keep getting 1 hour. But that's not what I wanted, right? Because by 0.9 of an hour isn't an hour. Instead, I imported math, which is a Python package, so that I can use the function of math.floor. And by utilizing math.floor, I was essentially telling it, if it's not a whole number, go to the lowest number possible. So even though it was 0.9, it was still giving me back 0. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that answered my question. Thank you.
Of course.
Francisco, there's another way that we could do that too. With floor division, like with the double division sign.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's true. So we could utilize this method, and it's called floor division. Thank you so much, Ty, for bringing that up. And basically what this does is exactly the same thing as math.floor. It's going to essentially give me back that 0. Yeah, thank you, Ty.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Okay, let's keep pushing then. So write a function that returns the area of a right triangle given a base and height. Okay, it gives me the formula. That's good. So the area is equal to 0.5 times base times height. And here's the base and here's the height, I'm assuming, right? Yeah, so it gives me the base and the height. Okay, so how do I pass in those two parameters there?
Base comma height.
Nice, base comma height. Okay, and now to solve it, how could I solve it?
Could you
Area
do
equals 1/2 base star height.
Area equals 0.5 times base times height. Okay.
Return area.
Return area. All right, let's try this out. Perfect. Now we get both truths, and then just so that we could visualize it, let me print out the area. All right. And let's run that, and we can see the 2.0 and the 0.5. And that's perfect. Nice and easy. Thank you so much for sharing that. I didn't get to see who was sharing that answer, but great job. Does anyone have any questions over this? Okay, perfect. And that's actually all the assignments that we had yesterday. We still have some time. Do you guys want to see some assignments done from today? Or do we prefer to get cut off early? Okay, I'm gonna push into the assignments for today. More code is always better. That's not necessarily true, actually. Okay, these two should be more than enough to carry us the rest of the way, but if it's not, we'll go into the next one. All right, so we have the SpaceX countdown, and actually, I accidentally did this exercise during today's lecture, so I'll let you guys walk me through how to complete this exercise.
I can help you.
All right, let's check it out.
Okay, so def countdown num, and then I start it with an if statement. If num is greater than 0, colon. And then I have print an f string. So print f. Yep, and then there are, and then in curly brackets I have num, and then seconds left until takeoff, exclamation point, close the quotation marks, and then close the parentheses, and then elif num double equals 0, colon, print liftoff, exclamation mark.
All right, yeah, let's try this out. Okay, so we see there are 5 seconds for liftoff, and then it gets cut off. All right, so what can we change in our code to ensure that it iterates all the way down? This is definitely the correct path, right? But I think instead of an if statement, we want some sort of iteration variable so that it can conduct this behavior over and over again. Anyone have any ideas? Okay, I see Pia mentions a while loop. So let's change this for a while. And now we have num greater than 0, but we never change num's value. Where should I change num's value? Otherwise, I'm going to be stuck in an infinite loop, right? So if I run this right now, oh, sorry, let me comment out these real quick. So if I run these right now, we see that it never stops and it continues telling me 5 seconds.
Couldn't you do less than or equal to 0?
Well, if I do less than or equal to 0, it would actually never run.
That's what I meant greater than.
Oh, greater than or equal to 0. We can, yes, and we're still stuck on that infinite loop because we're not changing num's value.
So we need to decrement num by 1.
Yeah, perfect. Where would I decrement num by 1?
After your print statement.
Okay. So now I'm gonna say num minus equals, and I see Pia also shared it in the chat. And now when I run it, I get 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And now we have 0 because we're running the greater than or equals. So that's perfect. But we still need this liftoff part. Where does liftoff come in? And do we still need an if statement? Or an elif statement?
No, you can take that off and then unindent that lift off. I mean, I guess you could still have that. Yep,
Do you want to indent it or unindented?
I have mine like that.
Okay, perfect. So let's check this out. And let's watch it run. Nice. So now we see 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and then lift off, just like we wanted it to. This is great, everybody. Awesome.
Do you want to see something cool? If you import time, you can have it like count down every single line.
Import time.
And then after your print statement, put time dot sleep and then parentheses 1. That's how many seconds, and then print it.
Nice. So it waits a whole second to go to the next one. That's great. That's so cool. Yeah, there you go. It's awesome. All right, so now we got our SpaceX countdown all built out, and let's move on to remove zeros. Okay, this one's a little bit harder than what it seems. So let's see, write a function that returns a number with all the zeros removed from it. And actually, now that I'm looking at it a second time, it's actually not very hard, but the problem is that we haven't necessarily covered this information yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and take lead on this one. So now, earlier today, we discussed the replace function. And we know that the replace function is something that works with strings, but I'm currently working with a num. So I'm gonna go ahead and say, I want a string num, and it's equal to str num. And now I'm gonna go ahead. And what I'm gonna do with str num is I'm gonna create a new variable. So I'm gonna name it cleaned str num. I'm gonna make that equal to str num dot replace. And here it tells me old, new, and count. Well, I just need old and new. So my old would be anywhere where the instance of 0 is located. And my new is just an empty string. Okay, and now I want to turn it back into a number. So let's say num cleaned str num is equal to int cleaned str num. And then I could return the number cleaned. And these are actually not in the correct format, which I apologize for that. Okay, so I put it inside of the print statement. I have these numbers. Let me start with the first one, and let me actually print each iteration. So print str num. Then I want to print the cleaned str num. And then I'm going to print the num cleaned str num. Okay, so I'm going to say string clean string clean number. Okay, so now I'll go on to the shell. I'm going to go ahead and run this file. Okay, so we see that the string came back at 1001. It's exactly the same input that I sent into it, but it's now a string, right? Because we cast it into a string type here. After that, I cleaned it up by replacing all of the zeros with empty spaces. So it gave me back the number 11. which is the clean string that I have there. Then I turned it back into a number or an integer here. And now I can see the clean number that's printed out on line 8. And that is also what's being returned. So it matches the number on line 13. All right, so there, it just took a little bit of data casting, but all we basically did was we turned it into a string so that we could use the replace method. And then after that, we turned it back into an integer after utilizing the replace method and cleaning up the string. Does anyone have any questions over this problem?
Couldn't you run this problem using the for each method as well?
We definitely can. Yeah, not necessarily a for each, but a for in, right?
Yeah, for in.
Yeah, so we could do, how would you do it that way?
Well, I answered it using Java because I'm trying to get better. So correlating these two would be difficult for me to do, but I put let ARR of num equal number dot to string, and then parentheses, nothing inside those parentheses at the end of to string dot split, and then parentheses and the top tick marks, not comma, 2 commas.
Okay,
The single ticks is what I did up top.
okay, so you created a list of characters of the number interpreted into a string.
Yes.
Okay,
And then I put let answer equal
okay,
and put the, I guess it doesn't matter that you put the double ticks as long as they're the same going down, but I use the single ticks up top.
Mhm.
And then semicolon after the 2 ticks up top. We need those.
well, okay, yeah, well, this is Python, so I can't put the semicolon in there, but yeah, I get what you're.
Okay. And then I put 4 parentheses let, so inside those parentheses I put let I equals 0.
So you're doing a for index in?
Yes.
Okay, so for index in range. Okay,
And then I did semicolon I is less than string number dot length.
right,
And then after that, put a semicolon I plus plus. And
Yeah.
then put the if statement at the bottom and put if parentheses string number brackets I exclamation mark equals equals, and then the 2 ticks 0, and then put at the bottom answer equals answer plus string number brackets I. And then just put return number parentheses answer.
okay, gotcha. Yeah, no problem at all. If you guys want to drop, I fully understand. Thank you so much, everybody, for showing up. 3 main.py. Oh my.
I put 2 equals for the subtraction right there, where you put the exclamation point on the line 6.
You want to do an equals?
The 2 equal signs on line 6.
Yeah, but if we do equals 0 and add it to the answer, then we would just get zeros. We want to make
I still kept the subtraction. I just put an additional equal sign, and then I didn't do plus equals for line 7. I did answer equals answer plus string number, and then index in the brackets. I mean, I did do it in Java because I am trying to learn Java. So correlating the different languages between each other has been a struggle for me.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand. I went wrong somewhere here because this should have worked. See what's going on here. So we got 1001 answer plus 3 equals. Oh, I'm not printing that. Okay. Oh, I didn't cast it back into an integer. That's my bad.
Because also doing this one helped me answer that one assessment question in JavaScript. So
Yeah, it was a lot of information. I'm sorry, Kayana. If you're still here. Yeah, you are. I'm so sorry. Yeah, awesome. No, this is great. And being able to interpret in between languages is definitely a talent that will come later on. We just got to keep reinforcing it. But yeah, this is great, everybody. Did everybody understand this method? So in this method, the replace, this is what dot replace is essentially doing. It's building this functionality out. It's going to iterate through that entire data structure, whether it be just one string or a list, well, one through the entire string, and it's going to filter out those zeros and return to you a new string. So this is, if we were doing it manually, this works, but it's essentially doing the same thing as the dot replace. And just remember, to fix this problem, you just need to do a little bit of data casting. So for here, for example, we had to run it into a list after turning it into a string and then being able to reiterate through it. Yeah, and this is it. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate everyone's time. If anyone has any questions, please reach out to me. But other than that, I will see everybody tomorrow evening. Thanks, everybody. Have a nice day.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Likewise.
Thank you.
yeah, so I think in Java I changed it to like you were saying, but I used array of numbers, I think is how it kind of related it. I think that's what I did in Java, which between the two, the languages are a lot different, and Python's definitely 10 times easier. It's more simplistic, and it's like, oh, you just do an else or if statement. Java, they're like, nah, we want eyes and everything else put in there. We want double everything that Python requires, and then you're looking at it and you're like, what the hell?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I remember when I was learning C#, I was a little bit confused by their entire syntax as well. And yeah, it's weird. That's one of the biggest reasons why I like Python, is because it's a lot more English or user-friendly oriented. Oh, I totally forgot to pause the recording.